June 6th is going to mark a very exciting time out here in the West for the One Piece trading card game. Not only do we get a brand new set, which is going to introduce new archetypes, new ideas within the format, but also we're getting these 6 new starter decks, starter deck 23 through 28, that look to revamp a couple decks, give a couple different cards to existing archetypes that can help them thrive within the format. Not only that, but this is going to be a format that is unique to the West. The Eastern meta didn't have these starter decks with an influence, so it's going to be an entirely new format for the West to tinker around with, build, be creative within, which I think a lot of people are excited about, especially with big regionals like Vegas and Los Angeles coming up, which if you're going to Vegas Regional, I will be there. Come sign a card, join my wall. We're going to continue our tier list on the meta for us and have a decent discussion on what I feel like, and feel free to discuss with me in the comments as well, what you feel like are good plays, good meta calls, or even bait decks within the format. But first, because I need to pay rent this month, let's hear from a word from our sponsor. Our friends over at Nen Garnet have officially kicked off the summer sale on their website. Prices are slashed from 10% to 60% across the entire store now. You can pick up some crazy discounts on One Piece based mats like the Heavenly Yaksha, some great anime themed mats like Paranormal Playmat and also the Curse vs. Beast, as well as if you get a Sun God playmat right now while supplies last. Every purchase of this specific Stitched Edge playmat gets a free playmat tube as well to help protect what you love, as well as a brand new pre-order that's dropped in the Pokemon region if you're a fan of Final Boss, which the colors on this are insane, man. I love this design. You can use my code Atrocious to save an extra 5% off and help support the channel, and make sure to grab your new favorite playmat while this sale's going on because you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the video. Okay, so quick disclaimer, this is our EBO2 tier list. The exact tier list that we had in our EBO2 tier list video, talking about that a couple weeks ago. In order to not make this video an hour long, talking about over 100 leaders, I'm just gonna modify this tier list. Now, Green Purple Luffy is most definitely the best deck in the EBO2 format, but it still holds super strong within the OP11 format. A lot of the format is thought around this deck, and it really influences deck building decisions and different tech cards, which even though it may not have the same results as something like Pluffy that we saw in the Eastern meta at the tail end of the OP11 format, it's an incredibly strong deck that you're going to have to look out for, especially for the people that love this deck. It's a really unique playstyle and very interesting that I think a lot of people will just hook onto and stick onto because it's still like a top 2 deck in my opinion. I'll go down and adjust my tier 3 category though, starting off with putting Buggy in there. Now, I know a lot of you are going to probably give me flack for this take because I will admit the Buggy deck did get enhancements. There's so many good cards within the starter deck for this. The 8-drop Croc Mihawk is really good. The Alvida's really good. The new 2Ks are pretty good. But personally, I don't fully buy into what you all say. I did say to you though that I will put my money where my mouth is, and when I get my hands on the starter decks, I will be doing an extensive amount of testing with this deck to see if it's legit. Feel free in a civil way in the comments to let me know where you would place Buggy. Video coming soon. I've also decided to take off decks like Boa and Law off the tier list. You could also argue that Uta needs to come off too. Katakuri, I'm also throwing you off. They don't perform. I am also putting Usopp down 1. Usopp in my mind has just been underwhelming and still a good and viable deck. I just don't think it can really keep up with the 2 main Luffys coming out around right now in the format. I am also diving down Shanks into the tier 3 cope category. Shanks just fell off a map completely when OP11 released. And the starter deck, in my opinion, didn't really help it at all. The only reason that I've still got it in this tier list, at least in the cope category, is because I find that 9-drop Shanks to be extremely interesting. Can that new Shanks in the starter deck in a format where Blue-Purple Luffy will probably reign supreme, can that card help it enough to be able to still hold some sort of ground against all these other decks? That's going to be the big question for Shanks heading into this meta, but I would not take Shanks into an OP11 regional right now. Like, spoiler alert, Blue Purple Luffy is going to be incredibly good, and I'll talk about where I'd place it later, although if you've been following the channel, you probably already know where it's going, but I'm saving the OP11 leaders till the end. So shush. Blue Purple Luffy is just going to be able to ramp faster than you and play down bigger bodies, the same kind of bodies that you want, faster and also more aggressively. You just don't have a way to keep up with that. And because of how the format has evolved, you just either get rushed down or you just get out-talled, I guess. Is that a word? Out-talled? I just don't see it for Shanks, but I'll give it a little bit of credit because of that one card in the starter deck. Smoker, I'm also moving down. Smoker ended up being an incredible meta call for the Japan finals, right? Ended up winning and dethroning Green Purple Luffy. But outside of that one event, not really been existent. Didn't really win a ton of flagships, didn't really have too many other appearances in 11, and I think the deck was just kind of that best meta call moment, where I think that moment also has passed. Smoker's also in that category of, like, now that we're in OP11, I think that there's just too many other better decks that I want to utilize that could kind of just stomp this. I'll put Kid and Lim down here too. They kind of fall in that same situation, and Kid has really been falling on my tier list since it first released in 11. Lim, I think as the format has evolved, has become less and less valuable, and I think especially with other ramp decks in, like I mentioned, Blue Purple Luffy coming in, as well as other good removal decks, it's just, Lim just can't, like, keep up. Like, the bodies are just too small to be able to utilize, especially when you don't have rush and things like that, like some of the red decks that we'll talk about later that are also pretty low to the ground. It's worth exploring to see if stuff like big bodies like 9-cost Zoro coming back into the deck could influence a little bit, especially when you talk about ramping to something like that in and against stuff like Blue Purple Luffy. But until that happens, I'm not really high on the deck. And use as Captain Kid, I just feel like if you're gonna play like another kind of burn deck, like Blue Yellow Nami, which isn't entirely focused on burn, but it is a component playing 8-cost Kid, I feel like you're just better off playing that rather than Kid. But Kid getting lots of new interesting additions, right? Removal with Zeus. The Bonnie deck was just green, so nothing you can use, and then also the Yamato deck didn't really have anything either. It just doesn't feel like it's in a better spot than it was before for me. I'm also taking the Smoker off the list entirely. I'm off the Smoker train. There's just decks that do what you want to do, but better. Some of the other decks that I will put in the tier 3 cope category, which I might as well just scroll down, because I don't think anything from up here is going in there now. I actually put Carrot in the tier 3 cope. Carrot in that new starter deck, getting the 10-drop boss monster in the Law and Beppo, I think is really cool, and gives you now like a boss monster to work towards. I've watched a couple Carrot videos since that starter deck was revealed, and I'm not unimpressed by it, I think, at all. I still think it's in like a generally cope tier, but I think it's like really interesting and viable cope. Oh yeah, I'm removing Rebecca, by the way. Arlong, I will put in the cope category as well. I mean, you guys hyped up Arlong like crazy, especially in OP11 with that new 7-drop. And did it even, how many entries does it have in One Piece top decks? It has one in a store tournament. Now, I know that it did have some flagship placements, but I think my point comes across that, like, Arlong is a cope deck. It really is. I would probably put Buggy above Arlong for all you Buggy fans out there. I'm also putting Pudding in this tier because Pudding did get some really interesting cards within OP08. I just don't think they were as good as what I thought it could be when it first got introduced in Japan. Now, do I think that it makes it unplayable? Absolutely not. But especially for the local goons, and I know there's some purple yellow pudding fans out there, you're definitely gonna rock locals a couple times with it. Now, frequent viewers of my videos may remember me being slightly higher on Chopper. As you'll start to see as we talk about the tier list more and more, aggro decks are kind of the new wave. So like Chopper I would put in here. Red Yellow Sabo I would put in here. This won a couple flagships as well as Chopper. Are great examples of like decks that did well because aggro is so needed within the format, or is a viable option, so you're just like glass cannon all in. I'm a fan of these two decks in the more rogue category, and the cool thing I think about this format is there's a lot of cope decks in here, and I'm going to be adding a couple more, because I think especially at the local level, like there's a good amount of decks that you can play and like be successful with. I just wouldn't take any of these decks to a regional, I think. Rosie is probably my only one that I would, just because I think this deck is so funny. Starter deck 14 Luffy, I think, has a little bit of merit to it with the introduction of the 8-cost Garp, right? Being able with your leader effect to KO any, 9-cost body on the field is insanely strong, especially in a format where blue-purple Luffy plays out 9-drops like crazy. It's in a really interesting spot. I don't know if I want to consider it a top cut squeaker yet. It's one of the closest decks I feel like out of my cope decks when I finish this tier list that could be in this section of the board, but I need to watch a couple more Cardi Kaizoku videos though before I really introduce it. Now, Kalgara I'm also putting in the cope tier. It was really interesting because we saw in the OP11 flagship stats that Kalgara had the highest win rate out of 10,000 recorded flagship games. Now, it barely met the 50 game minimum at 53, but I definitely think that Kalgara is potentially an underexplored deck that could really bounce up within the West. I'm not ready to put it up here, but similar to starter deck 14 Luffy, these two guys right here are the most likely, in my opinion, to really jump up here after it's all said and done and I finish out this tier list. Now, for the rest of the tier list, though, let's go ahead and fill in the top cut squeakers in the 2.5 category. I still think all three of these decks are here, right? Reiju getting a pretty good size of cards in the new Reiju, the new Ichiji, the vanilla 2Ks, right? Still makes it like a strong contender and also an aggro deck that can work in the format. Vegapunk is one that plenty of people have enjoyed with EBO2's introduction of the 5-cost Vegapunk, and especially as an annoying deck to get rid of that has so many bodies so fast can overwhelm you. Vegapunk hitting the right bracket can really make it through into a top cut. Nami I still think is a 2.5. I think there's some really good stuff in Nami, and I think it's still viable in the OP11 format, right? Facing up against a lot of setup decks going on right now, right? I still think Nami has a pretty good matchup into green-purple Luffy, and I think it has a decent enough matchup into blue-purple Luffy to be able to be utilized, especially because blue-purple Luffy is just like swinging one time per turn for the first 4 turns of the game. Maybe stuff like Marguerite gets reintroduced into the deck, so then if blue-purple Luffy wants to get rid of those blockers on their couple swings at the beginning of the game, they have to use something like Usohachi, which is fine because that's not a big body like Sanji or Lin. It's a really interesting spot. I'm curious to see how Adam Cisneros specifically and some of the other good Namis in here like Merc, Sneezy, that have seen success with Nami continue to try it out and see what happens. I don't think it'll surprise a lot of people that Marco's making it into the 2.5 category of the top cut squeakers. I think Control Marco's actually really nice within this format, especially being able to battle those big bodies that come out on the field. You're almost like a pseudo black deck in a sense, just based on like your removal, and especially with the smaller bodies as well, you can more easily get rid of those smaller bodies in Zoros, Bello Bettys, Limbs to help keep your game plan alive and really stabilize at certain points within the game. I don't know if I'd put it in tier 2 yet though, because even though Marco was definitely a response within the format, it wasn't like it did exceptionally well. I think it was very similar to like Reiju, right? I'm also going to put Enel in the top cut squeakers. I know the joke is with the Raigo ban, Enel got hit insanely hard with the ban list, but I think Aichi really revealed that Enel is still relatively viable, right? Especially in its huge focus around removal. It's still a deck that, especially with the first couple rounds of a tournament, people just don't know how to play against it, you could just slam. You also slam a lot of rogue decks, and you have decent matchups into other things on top of that. So I still see Enel kind of squeaking its way in. I still see JCM like piloting Enel to a top cut. My last two that I'm putting in tier 2.5 are actually a little bit of spicy, and I think the starter decks are a huge help to it. The first is Green Yellow Law. I'm actually huge on Green Yellow Law within this format with the new starter decks, that new killer that's come in the deck. Just another search function that comes with this leader is really nice, right? Because searching is the name of the game. The deck thrives if it can search. The more you search, the more you win, I feel like, with this deck. And so with another option that's not just the one-drop Luffy that you get an on play with, I can see Law having a little bit of success in this format. I think that it also in OP12 gets better. I don't know how much better in OP12. I do really like that 5-drop secret rare, but that'll be in the future. So for now, you just gotta wait in here. It is an extremely aggressive deck though. And I'm also gonna put Yamato in 2.5. A lot of people generally think that these starter decks are pretty underwhelming. And one of those underwhelming decks people thought were Yamato. I still can't believe you guys fell for that fake reveal of the like Hody Jones, but better. Like, no way they make a better Hody Jones this soon. But I do think the additions that Yamato got within the starter deck really help out the deck. It's like just a couple key pieces that get slid in there that really help it out. Like you have a searchable Onami with a chance to still play Onami. You also have a 1-drop searcher, so you don't have to play something like Momonosuke, right? It's a 1 Dawn turn kind of card. The Kinemon is an excellent 2K that you can play and trigger body as well onto the field to be on that aggression. And the Momonosuke is a really nice 8,000 power rush character, so it doesn't feel like every single time you have to play Hody Jones, right? Like that's huge for the deck, especially when that Momonosuke synergizes so well with your leader effect. And also that Yamato is really nice in the aggression, so really good 1-drop. And the Izo being a nice chum blocker too, as well as banish, is just like, it's almost like a better Onami. I'm really excited about Yamato heading into this starter deck format, and I'm really curious to see how it goes. The gimmick deck where it's just like AK banish to face, AK banish to face, AK banish to face, now has a little bit more legitimacy to where it's maybe not just a rogue gimmick deck that I always just put in cope because it's a leader that has double attack. Maybe, I mean, I think it has a little bit of legs. But finally, to round out the tier 2.5s, I'm actually going to slide Dofi way down. I don't think Dofi fell as hard as Shanks did in the OP11 format, but I still think Dofi really took down a couple notches when Blue Purple Luffy and company came out within the meta. The starter decks, thankfully, didn't help it too much, and I still think Dofi does a lot of good things, but I think its power has really just gotten scaled, and really it's just a good deck now within this format. It's not a top 5 deck. It's not a great deck, an incredible deck, but it's good enough to where, like, if I'm going to play Doflamingo and I've been playing it for the last year and I don't want to play it and I don't want to play anything more than Doflamingo, looking at you, Wimmy, I think it's still like a decent option. Now, the tier 2 category, I still think Red Purple Luffy and Bonnie are in this category. Bonnie, I admit, will be better because Bonnie is a really good answer to certain things, but like Bonnie will take down so many different flagships. It'll do so well on the flagship level. It'll look like a top 5 deck, top 3 deck with the flagships, but then we get to the championships and I'm like, where's Bonnie? The Aichi championships didn't really do much. So Bonnie, I will still keep up here, but it's really weird. Bonnie's the weirdest placement I feel like in this format. And honestly, I think Zoro is still on this. I think that out of the hyper aggressive decks, Zoro is definitely up there. And there's reason to believe that you would put it in the tier 1 category, but it's so tough. This guy really floats between these two. But I think if I'm going to keep Bonnie here, I think I'm also going to keep Zoro here. Now, one card that I will add into this is Purple Black Luffy. We saw in OP11 how Purple Black Luffy really was a top deck squeaker, right? In that 3v3, it had a really cool list that actually did super well within Blue Purple Luffy. And I think on top of getting stuff within the starter deck, I actually buy into a little bit of the hype that Purple Black Luffy needs in this format. It got an extra 3-Dawn turn, which is huge for the deck to be able to ramp. That 6-drop Luffy allows you to be a 7k leader, which we've seen in the tournament championship VODs, how being a 7k leader can be so valuable. So I mean, I don't know. I really am excited about Black Purple Luffy within this format. I think I buy into the hype, but I don't buy into it totally. Like, I buy into it more than Buggy, right? Anyways, let's talk about Blackbeard. I would originally, before the starter decks, put Blackbeard down to this tier 2 category, but I think although it is slight, and I don't know how much it actually gains, I think the gains that it gets with the starter deck is warranted enough to put it in this tier 1 category and keep it there. Like, having access to the Kuzan is super valuable, right? As well as the Blackbeard being really cool, and a lot of those other cards that are unique in there might see some play every now and then. I don't know how much, but I think there's a lot of different options now for Blackbeard to utilize different game plans, different strategies in its time within this meta. I still also think that, like, even though we're kind of getting away from it a little bit, there's a lot of decks that are still super heavy on play effects that you just shut off, and so therefore you already have a competitive advantage. I will also move Bello Betty up into the tier 1 category. If you're a Bello Betty fan, now is the time to play Bello Betty. It's the best that it's ever been, in my opinion. It's a top 5 deck, in my opinion. You oftentimes just high roll and go so fast, you just shut down everything else before they even get ready. There's going to be a lot of Bettys, especially because it's like a $20 deck. If you watched our video of how much One Piece decks actually cost, the Bello Betty lists are actually not that too far off from that video, even though it was a couple weeks ago. So yeah, if you need a cheap deck to be able to play and be successful with, grind out some Bello Betty. Now, that's enough shuffling of the pre-existing decks. Now we have to talk about the 6 new decks that have been introduced to the game: Kobe, Jinbei, Shirahoshi, Luffy, Nami, and Katakuri. I'm going to start off with Jinbei and Shirahoshi. They're not on this list. Although I love Shirahoshi and I think there's some really cool stuff with Jinbei, I don't even know if I'd put the decks on the same tier as, like, my Rosinante deck, the Buggy deck, even Arlong. There's some cool stuff that you can do, and especially at the local level, there are some things that are really nice for the deck, but no, they're very fun though. Kobe, I would include in the tier 3 category. Kobe has a lot of fans and is a cool deck that you can find success with, but it feels clunky as red and black is a color combination that just doesn't really fit. I think the synergies got better, right, with the introduction of Sword within this set and different things like the Helmeppo, but Kobe just really does not have what it takes, I think, to compete in this meta. I think that if, like, something got banned, I think could open the door for this deck to be successful, but I just don't really see it for the time being. I will go ahead and throw some tier 2 decks in the category, starting with my personal favorite and deck that I think all play in OP11, Charlotte Katakuri. We saw Katakuri in the 3v3 really showcase what the deck could do and a lot of its strengths, with being able to utilize the Parasparrow, Charlotte Linlin, 10-drop, and plenty more, especially as the only deck that can actually search the 8-drop Katakuri blocker. People in Japan have told me that it actually has a really good matchup into Blue Purple Luffy, and especially if I expect that Luffy to be one of the more popular decks in the room, sure, I'll take some bad matchups from the stuff down here. I think this format is diverse enough to where, like, and I think most formats are diverse enough, especially with a pretty much 3-year-old game at this point, that you can't account for everything. You have to take losses somewhere. You cannot have, most decks, I guess I should say, don't have good matchups into everything. Now, Nami, I will also put in the tier 2 category. Out of the gate when OP11 released, a lot of people really downplayed Nami, including myself. It really didn't show up. But especially when that Aichi Championships came around, we really saw what Nami could showcase, especially against a variety of different decks within this format. Being able to be a 7,000 power leader, consistently draw, as well as different burn effects like the 8-drop use as Captain Kidd, really in my eyes put it at a competitive level within this format. There's going to be a lot of people maybe buying on that hype of what we saw in the Aichi Championships out here in the West, but you do have to figure out a couple things. One being, what do you replace the starter deck 22 Ace and Whitebeard Kazuki Odin? Because we don't get that until August. But I still think that there's enough options within the meta to replace that card that still give you some very viable strategies heading into the different regionals that we've got coming up. And finally, to probably no one's surprise, I will put Blue Purple Luffy in tier 0. Now, I do think it is by and far the best deck in the format, and so a lot of you may say, Jake, based on that reasoning, why is Green Purple Luffy also up here in the BDIFs category? Almost forgot to add the S. I think that both of these decks together really just shape up the meta. Especially, I mean, there's a conversation of putting Purple Luffy in that tier as well, I think, as just like these three are the best decks in the format. But I think that Purple Luffy maybe doesn't have as much of a stronghold. I don't think that the format morphs around Purple Luffy like it does with Green Purple Luffy and Blue Purple Luffy. It will have the same population numbers, it will be successful, but all of these other decks in here aren't changing up their lists as much, thinking about these two matchups up here. Blue Purple Luffy, I think, is by and far the best deck. If you are someone that wants to play the best deck in format, it is without a question Blue Purple Luffy. Name of the game, just ramp really fast and then play down your big bodies and stabilize. Once you get that leader effect off, you stabilize and you do so well against so many different decks. And you're really going to get tired of Gum Gum Giant if you weren't already. But yeah, here's the tier list zoomed out so you see everything in these categories. Feel free to have a civil discussion with me in the comments about what you think is undervalued, overvalued, etc. Because in all honesty, this is just an opinion. Thank you so much for watching this video. And again, subscribe for more content. We've got more OP12 and OP11 starter deck content on the horizon. Very excited to get this to you. And some OP12 championships coming up this weekend, at least at the time that this video comes out. It should be around that point. And again, I'll be at the Vegas regional sort of mid to end June. So come by, say hi to me, find me. I will probably be in almost the same outfit, and also join our Discord as well to be able to stay up to date about what we got and hang out with some of the members of the community, post your polls, talk about different deck builds, etc. Thank you again, and I'll see you later.